Hi, and welcome to our new session here on feature selection. So this is the second part on filter methods and feature selection. So here, not really going to introduce any new filter techniques. We talked about, I don't know, more than a handful in the last session. Just want to sharpen here your intuition a little bit by talking about maybe some examples where naively computing these univariate filter values might mislead you a bit. So they are not perfect. I mainly measure this univariate dependence between one feature and the outcome if you use the simple ones. So I guess we should rather be aware of their shortcomings. Yeah. Then we'll also talk a little bit about how to use them kind of in a pipelining setup and tune mainly the threshold value of how many features to include, but this is going to be rather obvious and somewhat simple. Nevertheless, I think it's better if we discuss it at least for a couple of minutes. So let's start. So on the next, let me actually reposition myself a little bit so you can see the slide numbers. So on the next, I think 3 slides, we're going to take a look at a couple of simple bivariate plots, usually with simulated data, usually simulated from some class conditional normal distributions. And I should also say that all of these examples, although we programmed them in R and kind of reproduced them a bit, they've all been stolen here from this very, very nice publication by Guyon and Eliseev. It's a pretty standard paper on feature selection that I think, well, I hope everybody reads. So you should do this yourself too. Please follow the link, read the complete paper. It's pretty nice. It's very, very, very standard. It contains a lot more than what we're doing here in this session, or I guess even maybe in the complete chapter. It's also somewhat lengthy, but very informative. There's even a complete book by Isabelle Guyon on the topic. You might read that as well. But at the very least, if you're interested in the topic, start by having a look at that paper. So what I want to do here in these, I think, 3 examples is have some bivariate data situation, which you can see here. So in this case, it's a 2-class problem. Guess it always is in the 3 slides here. So it's 2 classes, the class conditional distribution. So the distribution for each individual class, if a condition on the class is a Gaussian distribution. So there's no covariance in the sense that there is no correlation between feature x1 and x2. So our Gaussian would have diagonal structure. And the thing what we will now always do is that we will compute we won't really compute filter values, but what we will do is we will project our distributions onto the x1 and x2 axes, which you can see here and also here. Guess here. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess the bivariate plot here, that's just flipped. So I guess you just have to take a look at one of the two. But here you can see the projection on x2, and here you can see the projection on x1. And yeah, pretty obviously we have colorized the distributions by class. Well, and these projections here on the individual feature axes, that's basically what a filter method is going to see. So it's not necessarily now running something like a t-test on this here, but it could do that. It could also, I don't know, compute something, yeah, like information gain or something else. At the end, it's somehow going to access and work with these marginal distributions. And it's not going to have a lot more information than this. So now if we look at this example here, so well, these two features here, they don't have any correlation. So in a certain sense, they are independent. Maybe this would lead you to the naive assumption that they don't provide any added value. Also, your filter method might think that, because if you now compute the filter value for x1 and you compute the filter value for x2 from these 2 marginal distributions, they are not going to look extremely different. So you might conclude that x1 and x2 have kind of the same value, and if you can just pick one of the two, but using both will not be beneficial. And that's pretty wrong. Actually, yeah, well, we didn't really compute the filter values here, but what we did is we computed the accuracy of a classifier based on a single feature, and unsurprisingly, the accuracy is roughly the same if we either use x1 or if we use x2. And we also computed that for both features, but I guess you could also kind of directly see that from the plot. If you would discriminate with respect to both features, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to work much better than just using a single feature. And this is what they called here in the paper information gain from presumably redundant variables, presumably, because it might look like that by looking at the marginals, it might look like that by looking at the filter values, but it's not. Using both is better than just using one. Here is something maybe somehow similar. So this now is an example where we take a look at intra-class covariance. So what do we have here? We have two data situations, again with two class problems, binary classification, again class conditional Gaussian distributions, and the covariance structure for both classes is the same. So it's kind of this elongated thing here, with one pretty strong principal component and a weaker second principal component, only oriented to the first one. And this covariance structure is the same for both classes, and it's the same in both examples, because here it's also like that. The main thing that's different is how the mean values, so the centers of these Gaussian bumps are located. So you can see, here they're kind of on one line, or they're kind of on the same line as this first principal component, and here they're kind of located on the orientation of the second principal component. What's also pretty clear is that for the second example, you can pretty much perfectly separate the two classes by squeezing a hyperplane in between. Here I would probably separate somehow like that, but that's not going to be perfect. Now, do we get any, if we now look at the marginal distributions of x1 and x2 and then compute the filter values, are we going to see that? Not really, right? Because you can see here how the conditional distributions look like for the first case, and you can see here how they look like for the second case, and they actually look pretty similar. So first of all, again, it might not tell us that we should probably use both features to separate the classes, and especially in the, I guess, that's true for both cases. It's also not really telling us that we're going to have a much better chance than in separating the two classes on the right-hand side than on the left-hand side. So, and what now really counts is this intra-class covariance, but that's something that we really don't get from the filter values. And again, we are also not really potentially seeing that we get much better separation by using both variables. And here's a third example. So this is titled "A variable useless by itself can be useful together with others." So what we are very often interested in is like the usefulness of a variable conditional on us having maybe already used a couple of other features in the model. But again, simple feature filters don't really work like that. They just capture that univariate dependence between x, j, and y. So again, let's take a look at an example. So on the left-hand side, we see that one variable, and I guess that one variable is x1, has completely overlapping class conditional densities. So if we will now compute a filter value based on that, that filter value might be, I don't know, 0 or very bad. If you would now run the t-test filter on this would basically tell us, well, there's no real information if we would use x1 now to discriminate between the two classes. And for that single feature x1, without using anything else, any extra information, that might be right. If we look at x2, well, that certainly has some value to us. So how about we include that into the model? But now if we would take a peek at x1 again, I mean, the filter value would still look like that, because the filter value doesn't really know or incorporate that we have already also incorporated x2. So we might stop there and not use x1 anymore. On the other hand, you can clearly see that if you just use x2, again, there's going to be a considerable amount of error if we now try to discriminate between the two classes just based on x2. But if we would use both features, we have a pretty high chance of getting a classification error, which is nearly 0. On the right-hand side, we see this really, really well-known, well-studied XOR problem. So yeah, that's a problem where we also know that we would fail by using a linear hyperplane classifier. It's pretty obvious, right, that we can't really classify these two, can't classify the red guys here versus the green guys with a simple hyperplane, just not going to work. What I can actually do is using like a quadratic model, maybe like that, or some, I don't know, bump-based model, something more local, or put a bump here and a bump here for that class, and a bump here and a bump here for that class. And I guess now my scribbling is so bad that you can't see anything anymore. So let me actually remove this. Here, what I rather want to talk about is that what can we see from the marginal distributions? And now, if you look at the marginal distributions, actually both of these variables look bad. So if we would just act on the filter values, would maybe not take any of the variables, and we kind of conclude that we might be able to learn nothing here. But that's really not true, right? We can actually separate these classes quite well, depending on whether we are going to use some interaction effects on our model. So if it's just linear, it's actually not going to work that well with a quadratic model, or like I said, something local. And we use both features, we have a high chance of actually, again, separating the classes pretty much perfectly. Okay, that kind of brings us to the nearly the last slide. So I guess we can still talk a little bit about how we could use these filter methods in practice. I guess we're going to compute a filter score for each feature, put that in a little vector into a little table. Usually we are now going to rank the features by that filter score. And then I guess we have to pick the, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% best ones. And then we're going to train a model on this. And we're going to keep our fingers pressed that that model works quite well. Now, how do we actually pick that threshold? So either we can say we want to pick the 10% best features, or we could do something like the filter value must be at least blah, 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 blah to incorporate a feature into the model. But how do we actually pick that? Well, I guess the answer is going to be the same as for many of these control settings. It's a hyperparameter, pick it by cross-validation, and this is exactly what we're going to do here. I mean, there are some alternatives, so I guess maybe from domain knowledge, you would say I want to have exactly like 5% features in my model. I could also compute these filter values and then kind of look for something like a knee point in that plot, maybe also in a similar fashion how you pick the number of components in PCA. But to be completely honest, nearly all of the applications that I have worked on, that hasn't really worked very well for me. I was never really able to identify this knee point. And the thing is, if you have some way of quantitatively measuring the performance you're really interested in, and in this case, this might be if I pick X% of the features, how well is my model going to work on a fresh test set or under cross-validation? I guess I would really do that, and then also base my decision on that quantitative evaluation. And if you can evaluate stuff, you pretty much can also optimize against that. Surely you can then black box optimize against that. And that's exactly what we would do here. So we would just treat this threshold of the filter as one hyperparameter or an additional hyperparameter, and then just optimize that either in isolation or individually, because for the rest of our machine learning model or the rest of the pipeline, there are no other hyperparameters, but probably there are going to be some. And if that's so, then just like treat it as an additional hyperparameter and get rid of it through cross-validation and through tuning. And this is, I guess, what many people do nowadays. And here on the right-hand side, you can simply see two examples. So on the top plot, you can see a KNN classifier. On a test data set, we actually used two different filters. So we used an F-test filter. So I think this is a multi-class classification data set. And we used information gain. And we now plotted, so the number of features. I guess you can also plot that in percentage. Then you have something like a threshold between 0 and 1. And for every threshold. We now tried out what happens if we include these amount of ranked filter features into the model and then cross-validate this or evaluate this on a fresh test set. And we also plotted the optimal point. And you can also see that, I guess that's somehow obvious, that depends on the filter you are using. And it's also not super clear which filter now what would work best, right? You could actually do is you can treat this as a second hyperparameter. You could even do something like an ensembling of filters and mix these together. You can even optimize these mixing components. We even wrote a paper on that, which I might link on the web page. Yeah, just tune this. I guess that's kind of your best choice. It's quite hard to give some rules of thumb here that will robustly work. And on the second example, what are we looking at here? So again, on the x-axis, we have a number of features in our model. And now we look here at information gain and AUC. So I guess that's now a two-class problem. Well, I'm not guessing it. I know because that's the SPAM data set. And again, you can see how this develops and where the optimal point would be. So here we're using a logistic regression model on the SPAM data set. Just two different ways. Just two different examples. Okay, let's wrap everything up. So what are the advantages of filter methods? So usually they're pretty easy to calculate. They typically scale quite well with even very, very large data sets. So sometimes they're kind of, like I talked about quite a few of their disadvantages, and sometimes you just have to live with them because you are applying them to situations where if you do not filter down your data set at all in number of features, the data set is going to be so high dimensional that you cannot work with the data set at all. It's not going to fit in memory, or your algorithm runs so slowly that it just kind of doesn't work computationally. You just kind of use that as kind of a sledgehammer to filter things down to a manageable size. Yeah, generally interpretable with that. I wanted to say that I guess what the filters are doing is fairly easy to understand. Whether they're doing the correct thing that you actually want, I guess that's pretty much debatable. But yeah, their underlying maths and the underlying concepts are not so difficult to grasp. They're model agnostic in the sense that you can combine a filter with basically, well, not basically with any ML model. You just do a pipeline, right? Do the filter first and then the model of your choice as a second step. Disadvantages, well, they just capture these univariate dependencies. We talked about this now a lot. Redundant features will have similar weights. I'll discuss this also here. And they also ignore the learning algorithm in the sense that, yes, they are combinable with everything we want to work with, but yeah, they are not like adapted, geared towards a specific method. And if you want that, I guess rather use a wrapper technique, which are much slower, but which kind of maybe capture a bit better what you're interested in, and that we'll take a look at in the next session.